Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for a bittersweet episode because this is our final predictions and speculation for Andor. We have the season finale 3 episode arc coming out this week, and we're really looking forward to it after the incredible episodes of last week. So we can't wait to talk about what we think is going to happen this week. Before we do so, make sure you hit that like button. It helps our channel out so much, and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Just because Andor is ending doesn't mean we are stopping our Star Wars coverage. We still will be covering Star Wars every single week, all year round. So make sure you join us if you're a big Star Wars fan. Also, comment below, what do you think is going to happen in this final arc for Andor? We're wrapping up the entire show. Where do you think it's to go? All right, let's get straight into our predictions. And as usual, this will jump in time at least 1 year. Been talking a lot about on our streams the fact that if we're going to connect it directly to Rogue One, we are either going to jump more than 1 year in this first episode, or we're going to jump in time each episode as they go on. Because 1 BBY is not where Rogue One starts at 0 BBY. So we have to get there. We have to go a whole year to 2 years in time from where we were in Gorman Massacre. And so I kind of think we're going to jump each episode and kind of get a little closer and closer. Now that leaves a lot to speculate on the structure of this final arc. How does it connect to Rogue One specifically? And I think that's where they're going to go. It's going to be a Rogue One heavy send off here for Andor now that we have him transitioning fully into the rebellion and the rebellion fully forming. But we have K2 awakening, basically reawakening as the Alan Tudyk K2SO that we know from Rogue One. And that's kind of our main lead into what's going to happen here. We have to tie up, obviously, the arcs of Luthen. We have to get Saw closer to his very broken, damaged Rogue One counterpart. We have so many things to tie up and wrap up, as well as Krennic and the Death Star and all these things to go on. Sanak, what do you think is going to happen in these final 3 episodes of Andor, and where do you think each character kind of ends up as we get closer and closer to Rogue One?
In a strange way, I think we're not gonna really be watching the Andor finale this week. I think we're gonna just be seeing the Rogue One prequel. It's kind of how it's gonna feel like, and it's a bit of a shame to say because we've been absolutely enamored with these characters since 2022, and just seeing them change and evolve, and then having a lot of time off, and then coming back here and with this whole format change of like a condensed possible 5 season show into two. So, it's a little bittersweet to say, but I don't know how much more we're gonna get. We've lost some of the stalwarts of season one, like Cyril now. So do we necessarily need to even follow up on some of these characters? Like, you could honestly say stuff like, hey, Dedra crashed out, she broke down and just mentally isn't old there, and she's just doing ISB stuff, but it's not really the same anymore. And you could end her story there for all intents and purposes because you want to focus so much more on the characters and like the positioning that has to happen before Rogue One. And I think that will definitely have a heavier hand than I'd like for this show to not only be its own genuine piece of art, but also so that, a lot of these original characters can get their due. But I think we'll get some that will, but I think how this episode one, two, three kind of will be spread out. Like we've already said from the beginning, there's going to be jumps in between. We have to get closer to a 2 year story than okay, here's like one major event that happened this year that kind of everyone was involved in, right? So I think that third episode, no matter what, is going to be a Cassian episode. The show is called Andor. We know that it's going to end. The last few seconds, basically, of the show will be him walking into his intro scene in Rogue One. It's going to have to be his episode by the end, but I think he'll actually fully just dominate it by the final third episode. So then working backwards, it's like, well, what setup needs to happen just before? Well, I can see that second episode kind of becoming more of a proper Rogue One setup. So we'll probably see shots like we've seen in the trailers of Krennic kind of looking up at the Death Star from his ship. Hopefully you get to see Galen Erso and Bodhi Rook, right? I'd love to see all that stuff there. Finally, at least one scene adapted from what we've already kind of gotten extended material. We've already seen Andor's willing to change stuff up, right? Not only showing Mon Mothma's Senate speech, but also slightly more better than the ones that we see in the holograms in Rebels before she makes another speech out when she's with the Ghost Crew. Obviously, K2, just it's all completely gone. So, it's always going to be up in the hair exactly what they're going to do with some of the backstory that we already have for Rogue One now. But I think that stuff will be genuinely a bit better respected just because it's just the nature of this is what's important to the movie. Don't really try to change the motivations that the writers maybe had in 2014, 2013 before before this fully became a full project. So yeah, I think you'll still see a lot of that. It just might not be as much or as detailed. It could be kind of like how we see Cobb Vanth in The Mandalorian. You see his interludes and aftermath, and you're like, yeah, okay, that's a lot darker, deeper. But then you get like his version, what he thinks is acceptable to say to Manda. You can kind of look at his version of the story in The Mandalorian as like a POV. So I think we'll see some POVs in the same sense. Again, this is such a mature show. It's been handling like how it would be like for canon to not necessarily fit 100%, but because of its translation of sorts, by its storytelling group, by its acting, by its medium, etc. So I do wonder how much of like just that Rogue One backstory that was that lore that was there, which I think will feature heavily into episode 2, is going to be reworked or preserved. That's going to be very interesting. Then definitely pay attention to see if you can pick up cues there and just from stuff from 10 years ago that's from old source books and stuff. But yeah, I think this is all that second episode will be Saw Gerrera dominated. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what connects us to that rebel scene where he's kind of like making a big scene and Mon Mothma and Bail are like, it's over, like this, we can't have you anymore in the Rebel Alliance. I could see that episode kind of starting off with him building into where he gets his legs destroyed and everything, interweaving in Krennic, maybe a light Tarkin cameo or a hint of him coming about, just all the different blocks, all the different characters, Galen, Bodhi, and then Saw is still going to be carrying the Rebel line. And then you might see some reflection from Cassian or what he's seeing or what he's been doing for Rebel intelligence, how that dynamic with K2SO has changed once it's been established in that first episode, which I mean, I think you kind of just have to do that. That's just what everyone's been teased for. There's no way that first episode doesn't have K2SO and Alan Tudyk's K2SO just fully growing in front of us. So that's going to be fascinating to see. I do wonder how much of K2SO will be just the reprogramming from that one guy or how much of it will be Cassian. I do expect Cassian, because it was his decision to kind of take this droid and kind of the weird like parallel imagery that he has from Niemos when he got choked out by a KX droid. I do wonder if he maybe tries to pull in some B2 EMO. I might be the only person hoping for that memory matrix to be mixed in, but I don't know how much of that is nature versus nurture for K2SO. And I think that's going to be a really fascinating thing, especially now that we have a Cassian who is wholeheartedly dedicated to the rebellion because Bix is gone. Wilmon probably doesn't stick around these arcs and stuff like that. So, or he's maybe with the partisans or something, gets caught up and that dies there. And at this point, you don't have Bix to turn to Cassian. Who do you have? K2. And I really do wonder how that dynamic is going to be shaped by just what he's going through, what he's the place that he's in the world, just what technology is at their disposal, just what K2 himself is really like. It's going to be fascinating. I expect that one for them to be a little bit more just a couple of missions. Well, I don't expect them to be like heavy missions, but I expect him to go on like 2 to 3 missions before that final mission in the very last episode that I think is going to almost be entirely on him, just as like a way for him to like throw himself into work and then kind of just think about, reflect on everything from not just Bix's departure, but everything from that first few moments of making that silly choice of accidentally killing that Morlana 1 corporate officer and all that, and just the fuses of that. Maybe he's got reflections, learning more about Cyril. Maybe he does eventually succeed in killing Dedra. But I think in almost a weird, strange way, he'll be kind of going through the motions. Like even if its intensity for the rebellion is richer and stronger than ever, his reasons, his self-worth, his value that he once had probably might slip away until that final episode, until we get into Rogue One where we see him at his lowest but most fervent, and then we let Rogue One play out. So I kind of see all that stuff. I don't know how much we really see of Mon Mothma, honestly. I think maybe we'll see her and Bale kind of do some discussions. Frankly, I don't really know how much of their interactions are going to be major in this final arc. It almost feels like just strengthening the Mon Mothma Cassian bond, it might be an angle, and then Benjamin Bratt can maybe have some influence or distance with Cassian to kind of further elevate why this guy is the top agent, but also so cold-blooded. Stuff like that. I just don't really see much more narrative propulsion for them because we know Bale has to be going back and start spending more time with Leia. We know Mon Mothma is just going to be the face and she's going to be hidden, kept away, and organize everything for the rebel cells. Does that necessarily interact with the story of Cassian frequently and constantly? I don't know, but I think they're just going to be nice faces. We might see some other legacy characters because of that. Like I said on our stream, build out the Yavin cell to be much more militarized instead of like that village encampment with a mix of infantry and families and stuff. And that's all we'll probably get, honestly, from the rebels that continue, right? So that's how I look at it. I do think it's going to be hijacked by a lot of Rogue One stuff the closer we get to the end, but the rest of the characters, it'll just kind of come to the little touchstones, even if I want more from them too.
Yeah, I expect this to be Rogue One. in a lot of ways, but I still do think this show is going to hone in on its characters and use its characters as its base. I don't see us straying to other points of view throughout this show. I think we stick with the Cassian, Mon Mothma, Luthen perspectives that we've seen so much throughout this show. Even Saw, we haven't necessarily seen from his perspective. We've seen it from Wilmon's perspective, or we've seen it from other people's perspective, Luthen. We haven't necessarily followed Saw on his own. So I think we bring all these things together, but I think we still see it all through Cassian's story. And I still think Cassian has to have the biggest payoff in this arc because it's his show. So if you're ending the Cassian Andor show, I think you've got to put him not just in a place to where you see who he is at the beginning of Rogue One, but in a place where all the things that he's done since episode 1 of season 1 come to a head here, and he feels the weight of every challenge he's faced, not just Gorman, not just Bix leaving, but everything that's been building on him for years and years and years. And I think the Bix thing will be at the back of his mind. I'm torn on whether she shows up at all anymore, but I think she's gone. I don't think she shows back up. I think it's impactful for him as a character to now be forced to live the mantra rebellions are built on hope, because he has to hope and believe that he can see Bix again one day. And, for those of us who have seen Rogue One, we know that's not necessarily going to be what happens for him. So that's a bittersweet thing. And I think it works really well for the tone of this show. So I'm expecting that. I think he's going on a mission, obviously, with K2. They're going to form that relationship. At this point, you would expect them to have already gone on a few missions together, but maybe they do something where, like, in the first episode, the rebellion's a little hesitant to have sent K2 on a mission. So he's been grounded on base and he's just like lifting supplies all the time. And he's like, I want to go on a mission. And Cassian finally takes him on a mission for the first time. And then it kind of skips around a little bit. I think this arc, my vision of the arc is that if it does skip around across the 3 episodes, it doesn't skip much, maybe a month, maybe a few weeks, but I think it will start towards the end of the 1 BBY timeline and get ever so closely to that 0 BBY, the like moments, before A New Hope, because Rogue One starts like on that bubble. It's right before A New Hope. So it's got to be right there. And we know that they said Cassian is going to have the scene literally where we see him walking in to meet his informant in his opening scene of Rogue One. So we're going to get there. I think for Luthen, one of the things I think would be nice to tie in all the elements of Rogue One here is that Luthen is on the trail of the Death Star. I think him being on the trail of some major super weapon that they're building, we don't necessarily know yet, these characters don't necessarily know yet that it is the Death Star. Obviously, they find that out through Rogue One and through their missions there, and it's Cassian's informant who reveals to him that it's a planet-killing weapon. So I think here it's just going to be, what is the secret super weapon that Krennic's working on, and how do we figure out what it is? And I think that could be Luthen's last stand. It could be his way of giving his last bit of hope to the rebellion and dying for something he believes in. We saw in this last arc that he's willing to now fall back on things and help his friends and the people who have helped him, even if that's kind of against what he would normally do. And yes, maybe it's a bit selfish because he doesn't want them interrogated and him being found out, but he's willing to make some sacrifices that he might not have. He might have just killed the person before. Now he's trying to help them escape because there's something bigger, there's something grander out there, even if he doesn't necessarily feel like he's involved with it. And he doesn't necessarily trust Yavin or the Rebel Alliance, but he feels like there's something greater out there, and some of the work he's done has led to this bigger rebellion. So I think we see him be one of the people who initially is on the trail of that. I think Lonnie will be a part of that via the ISB. I think probably Lonnie dies, or at least is taken to Yavin and, out of the ISB by the end of this arc. But I expect that to come a little bit more to a head. I kind of expect Luthen to die and Clea to either die with him or narrowly escape. I think it would be interesting if she kind of plays a little bit of the Jan Ors type character, a little bit of a master like of the spy ring of the rebellion, maybe transitions on into that. I mean, it would be loosely related to Jan Ors, but in a way similar to that level of character here in the future. And you could bring her into a lot of other stories that way throughout all the stuff we explore through the OT. And I think she's a small enough character to where, like, if we never have heard of her in the comics or in the films or the TV shows that surround the original trilogy, it's something that it doesn't really matter. She can be in the background because that's literally the nature of her character. So I expect Luthen to go, though. I think he's too big of a character to be left out there, and I expect him to die in a kind of glorious way, but also a sad way. This show doesn't really elevate its deaths. It doesn't make you sit there and go, oh man, this is some heroic defining moment. Cyril literally gets shot in the back of the head while he's just standing there talking to Cassian after the fight. It's like the moment of calm in that fight is when Cyril dies. So I expect something similar for Luthen, but I do think the show will make a little bit bigger emphasis on it because of the importance of Luthen. But I think via that conflict, part of Cassian's mission will be helping Luthen, because it seems like it always goes back to helping Luthen on the heels of this rumor about the super weapon. With the infighting and inconsistencies amongst the leadership of the rebellion, you'll see a little bit of that between Mon, Bail, the other senators that we saw in Rogue One, the military side, because the military is so distant from the political side of the Rebel Alliance, even in Rogue One before they unite on Scarif. I think you see Radis there, you see Merrick, you see Draven, you see all the different characters who are involved in that, and kind of Cassian and Luthen needing to pull certain strings, and Mothma using her sway to pull certain strings to help on this mission because it's of importance, but not a lot of people really believe that it's something they should do. So I think it's, befalls Cassian and K2 to have that moment. I think in the same vein, we do get some more Dedra, and it's going to be involved directly with Krennic and maybe part of this super weapon program. I expect Dedra to be fully after Luthen in this show. Like, I think she is now going to dedicate her life to trying to catch Luthen because that's what she wanted to do prior to being assigned to Gorman, and now she's finally getting the chance. Cyril's gone, nothing's holding her back, and she needs somebody to blame for Cyril's death. So I think she's going to put it on Luthen and go after him. But she did such a great job for the Empire on Gorman that I think some of her promotion from that, some of the elevation of her work from that, will lead her in contact with Krennic. And then that's where we might get a little bit more of our Rogue One stuff. Could we get a Tarkin cameo? I think it would be awesome. I don't necessarily see the show doing that, but I think we definitely get references of Tarkin. We maybe even get to see the back of his head or something at one point. But I think we'll get more Death Star stuff. I know they've shown clips of it and like hinted at it in the trailers and stuff. Are those scenes from Rogue One? Those scenes from other material? Are they scenes from Andor? Could we see that? I hope we get to see a little bit of it. And hopefully that leads to Galen Erso, because I think that's a character that would be great to tie into this story. If we see Galen, we could see Bodhi, Rook, and Riz Ahmed's character. Now, I don't think we're going to do a full arc about them. The show hasn't really given us time to just transition to new characters, or at least new characters to the show, to just have a random arc. But I do think we start to see some of those pieces fall into line, and maybe some of the contacts and connections Luthen has lead back to Galen, and ultimately that's kind of this circle that hints at a lot of different things in Rogue One. And through Galen and through Bodhi, it also means the partisans need to be involved. So I think whatever the partisans are doing, I do expect a little bit of the havoc they've wreaked across the galaxy post Gorman to come back and be, put on and pinned on the face of the rebellion as like this figurehead that they can use as an excuse to commit really tragic acts of terrorism across the galaxy that go beyond what the statement of the rebellion is. And we see them doing that in Rogue One, stationed on Jeddah. Do we see them finally find their place on Jeddah? Do we see why they end up based on Jeddah? I think a lot of that could come into play here as we continue to talk about the mining angles and what Krennic's doing, mining for Kyber now on Jeddah versus Kalkite on Gorman. Does Dedra get involved in the different paths between those two projects? All of it, I think, is going to come to a head, and all the characters are going to crisscross. I think I see Dedra dying as well. I feel like she's got to go out with Luthen, and I think it would be kind of an interesting two different sides of the coin. Like, both have lost things because of the Empire, but one has gone all in with the Empire in order to try to fix things in her own way. And then Luthen obviously has forsaken the Empire and done his own thing to combat it. And I think it would be a bittersweet, interesting ending for the two of them to come face to face at the end, and her die as well. So I see Luthen going out. I see Dedra going out. I think Clea will make it. And I think Bix is going to be out of the show. I think she's gone for the show, and I think that's probably the right move at this point. It would be a little counterintuitive to the ending of that last episode if she just randomly comes back, but I'm excited to see more K2. I'm excited to see that relationship form, and I think ultimately whatever happens in the show, all of it is going to be surrounding the character of Cassian Andor and what his emotional arc is, his relationships with all these different people who either are going to die or leave his life permanently. How do all those things affect the Cassian we see at the beginning of Rogue One? I think that's going to be ultimately the mission statement of what this show and what this arc is about. So looking forward to that. What do you guys think is going to happen? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like the video. If you haven't, subscribe to the channel for more. We go live on Tuesdays right after the show's end. So if you want to join us live, ask your questions, give us all your thoughts on Andor as a whole. You can join us right after the show ends on our live stream. It will be our last Andor live stream, but we'll be back with live streams for other Star Wars news and the like across the year. Stay tuned for more Star Wars videos, shorts, polls, all that stuff on our channel. Even when Andor ends, we'll still have tons of Star Wars content for you all to check out. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will see you all next time.